Hallo zusammen, schön, dass wir wieder hier sind zu einem weiteren Interview mit Bradley Harper und Dorothee Schröder, diesmal zu Miss Harkness und das Damengambit und zur Kurzgeschichte Miss Harkness letzter Fall. Wir sind heute bereits zum zweiten Mal hier im Victory Services Club in London. Letztes Jahr haben wir uns bereits hier mit Colonel Bradley Harper getroffen und zusammengesessen, um über sein Buch Doktor Doyle, jagt, Jack the Ripper zu sprechen, das am 7. Oktober 2024 im Dryas Verlag herauskam. Und zu meiner Linken sitzt Dorothee Schröder, die das Buch ins Deutsche übersetzt hat. Und heute sprechen wir aber über den zweiten Band der Reihe, Miss Harkness und das Damengambit. Original Title ist Queen's Gambit, der am 7. April oder im April 2025 erscheinen wird. Und außerdem gibt es als Extra dazu eine Kurzgeschichte, die heißt Miss Harkness letzter Fall. I think the original title is The Exchange Principle, if I'm correct, die als E-Book veröffentlicht wird. Und beides ist auch wieder übersetzt von Dorothee Schröder. Wir freuen uns heute wieder hier zu sein. Kurze Vorstellung noch. Ich bin Brads deutscher Agent, Philipp Röttgers von Opera Scriptorium. Dorothee Schröder gehört ebenfalls zu unserer Literaturagentur Opera Scriptorium. Und this is our favorite author, Colonel Bradley Harper. Brad, it's good to be back again here at the Victory Services Club. We've had a long journey together since we met here last summer, didn't we?
Yes, we have. We've had a lot of adventures in the intervening months.
That is absolutely right. Let's start with Miss Harkness und das Damengambit. We mentioned it last time already because we knew it was going to be published. The original title is Queen's Gambit, and I know it's been quite some time for you since you wrote that novel, but maybe you can tell us a bit about what the book is about and maybe also how it ties in with Dr. Doyle, jagt, Jack the Ripper, aka A Knife in the Fog.
Okay, very well. After the first book, Knife in the Fog, Dr. Doyle has Jack the Ripper. After that was accepted for publication, my agent said, okay, the publisher wants to know what's next. I said, you want a second book? I couldn't believe they wanted the first one. So I had an idea. One of my favorite thrillers is The Day of the Jackal, about a fictitious assassination attempt on Charles de Gaulle. So I thought it would be interesting to do a fictitious assassination attempt on Queen Victoria with Margaret as the champion to try to prevent this assassination. You know, in real life, Queen Victoria had 7 attempts on her life by 6 people. One person got a second shot. She was riding through the park, and a policeman saw the assassin with the gun, and he was conflicted whether to salute the queen or grab the assassin. And he saluted the queen. The guy fired, missed, and got away to try again the following day. So, but I just thought it would be interesting. And one of the things that struck me was, the First World War brought about the collapse of the ruling aristocracy of Europe that had ruled for centuries. And the anarchists had been trying to do that, for several years. So I thought of the idea that the anarchists attempt the assassination because of Queen Victoria was called the grandmother of Europe, and all the interconnecting marriages of her bloodline in Europe. I thought that the assassins might use that as a means to instigate a war which would bring down basically World War I, but about 14 years sooner than it actually happened. And that was the nexus of the idea. I try to be as close to real life as possible. I do give Margaret a romantic interest. I won't go too much into detail in that, but in the end, I stayed true to her real life biography. And but I thought it was a lot of fun. Margaret is very smart. She's very tough, but she also has a very dry sense of humor. And of all the characters that I write, it's almost when I'm writing Margaret, I'm just taking dictation. She's talking directly to me. And so it was a lot of fun to write another story. In the first book, Knife in the Fog, she is a major character, but this second book is really her story. And so you get to know more about her background, her history, and her philosophy of life.
That is right. I mean, we know that because we read it and translated it. Maybe for 2 things for our readers. So we'll come back to that in a minute. The story is set in 1897, the year of Queen Victoria's Diamond Jubilee. But of course, especially our German readers, they've just read Dr. Doyle, Jagt, Jack the Ripper, and they probably want to know if Professor Joseph Bell and Arthur Conan Doyle appear again in the story. Can you give us a hint, or won't you give us a hint?
Oh, I certainly will. Well, actually, Professor Bell is the entree, if you will, and how Margaret gets involved in this whole affair. He is hired as a consultant to the German secret police. They know that somehow or other state secrets are being leaked from their office, and they can't figure out how it's being done. So they hire Professor Bell, the real Sherlock Holmes, to come and try to figure that out. He doesn't speak German, and he wants a translator he can trust. And so Margaret in real life did speak German and was widely published in Germany in her lifetime. So he hires her to come over as his translator. And there is I think it's the Rome Hotel in Berlin. I said I wanted to put them in an actual hotel that existed at the time, and I was in correspondence with the concierge, and she told me, oh yes, we were there at that time. And by the way, it was the palace was being reconstructed, so once a week the hotel carried a bathtub over to the palace so the Kaiser could take a bath.
Yeah. Brilliant, yeah. I know you included that in the story, which is also interesting, especially for the German readers, because it is partly set in Germany, and the hotel really does exist. Brad, I wonder, was it difficult writing? I think this is something that very many writers are being asked. Don't know if the answer is always the same. Was it difficult writing the second book after writing the first book, A Knife in the Fog? Also maybe because A Knife in the Fog had, it had a certain given structure, because you had the events of the Autumn of Terror, the Jack the Ripper murders, and the dates, so the storyline was fixed. So was it difficult writing the second one, or was it, just as easy, or maybe even easier? What was it like?
Well, of course, the first book was the first book I'd ever written, and it took me 3 years to write because I kept rewriting. The second book, I had such a clear idea. I wrote the first draft in 6 weeks. So once I had the idea for the story, it just kind of flowed. I would also mention that you can only write one Jack the Ripper novel. And, so I couldn't do anything like that. This had to be completely different, but I wanted to use familiar characters, particularly Margaret. So Bell is in about the first third of the book, and he makes a reappearance towards the end. Doyle only has a brief part because by this time, in 1897, he's a very famous author, and it would not be realistic for him to be chasing around after assassins at that stage of his life. So he does show up there briefly, but to take their place, there is an inspector from Special Branch of Scotland Yard. They were like the Federal Bureau of Intelligence for the United States, or MI5 predecessor. They were there to track foreign spies. So he's there working with Margaret, and he's a widower. He has a young daughter named Elizabeth who's 15, and Margaret becomes kind of a mentor to her because, like Margaret, Elizabeth is frustrated by the restraints on women in the Victorian society, and she wants to become a detective, to the horror of her father.
Yeah. This is a great inclusion, a great plot in the story. I really like that. Let's just stay with Miss Harkness and das Damengambit a little bit more. Maybe you can share the story of you and your lovely wife, Cherie, over there, trying to find a good spot from where a potential assassin could have tried to shoot Queen Victoria on that day.
Okay. Well, the day of the procession of the Diamond Jubilee wound through Europe, began and ended at Buckingham Palace, but the major ceremony was in front of St. Paul's Cathedral. Now, Queen Victoria was in her late 70s. She had rheumatism, and she did not want to hobble out of her carriage and go up the steps into the cathedral in front of thousands of well-wishers. And she hated St. Paul's. She said it was drafty, it was dark, it brought, she just didn't care for it at all. So she said, well, I'm the queen. If we have to do this, you'll bring this ceremony up to me. So if you go to the steps at St. Paul's Cathedral, there's this plaque, and it says, this is where Queen Victoria's carriage sat for 20 minutes while the ceremony went on, including the boys' choir from St. Paul's. So I stood on that exact spot, and I was an infantry officer before I went to medical school. So I say, okay, if I was because I figured she's motionless for 20 minutes. That is the best time for her to be assassinated. So I said, if I was a sniper, where would I want to be? Well, there's a big courtyard in front, and I thought, well, the top of the buildings would be a pretty good place. But unfortunately, they had temporary bleachers up there for people to watch. So a sniper couldn't hide there. Looking down on the site, there's a window from the cathedral, but it's on a stairway, so people would be going up and down the stairs. And of course, the roof of the cathedral would have well-wishers up there. So then I looked down a side street, and I saw one window on a corner of a building. Now, I hope it's not giving too much away, but I gave my assassin an air rifle, which is very much in the Sherlock Holmes genre world. Colonel Moran tries to kill Sherlock Holmes with an air rifle, and they could be pretty deadly to it within a short range. Now, they're not totally silent, but in the noise of a crowd, it would be quiet enough that no one would be able to notice the discharge from the rifle. So I saw this window. I walked to it. We took our lives in our hand. We had to cross the street in heavy traffic. It was 88 paces to the wall, but directly beneath the window. I said, well, that's well within the range of the rifle. Went to the front door and asked if we could come inside. It's a youth hostel now, but to my surprise, that building was the boarding school for the boys' choir at St. Paul's. So during the ceremony, it would have been mostly empty. So perfect place for the sniper to be. Now, Sri and I went to the room where that window was. She bravely climbed up on the bunk bed and looked out, and sure enough, it's looking right down on where that carriage rested. So I said, this is the perfect place. So in the final scene, I'm able to describe in great detail the climactic struggle, because it's an actual place that I've seen.
Yeah, very good. We were there the other day, weren't we? We also checked it out, and then we walked the 88 because we wanted to check if you were right, of course. We also passed it with a friend of ours who's a tour guide, and he mentioned to us that it's like, look at this beautiful building, this Italian mosaic front. It was the boys' choir, choir's school, right? And then I told him about your story, and it was quite interesting. I remember we once talked about how fascinating you found the character. I hope it's not too far away for you. The character of Police Commissioner Edward Bradford. I remember you telling me about that. Can you elaborate a bit why you found him so interesting? I mean, you included him in the story, and even it's not a great part, but it's you remember him as a character.
Yes. Early on, when I first began writing, I have an author assistant who helps me mostly in marketing. She lives in Toronto, and she said, I could do your research for you. I said, that's the one thing I have to do for myself, because as often happens, I'll be looking for one thing and I'll find something else that's more interesting than what I was looking for. In this particular case, I thought, well, the crowd control for the route of the parade would be the responsibility of the police commissioner. So I said, I need to know the name of the police commissioner at that time. So it was a baronet. I don't know what a baronet is, but it sounds important. And his name was Bradford. And as I read about the man, I found out he only had one arm. While he was a young army officer in India, he lost his left arm to a tigress. Was able to complete his military career. In fact, was known to go hunting for wild boar on horseback with a lance. And when he needed to use the lance, he'd put the reins in his teeth. To which I say, hail Britannia, That's a typical British gentleman, So he served out his entire career. The last 4 years he was in the service. He was the military aide-de-camp to Queen Victoria. So he had a very special relationship to the Queen. So he was the one who was responsible for the security. And so I involve him in some degree towards the end of it. Now, when I was in the Army, I was a commanding officer 4 times, for which I'm very proud to have been selected for. And there's one point where he's inspecting the route, and he and his aides are on horseback. He's in front. He stops and talks to someone, and then he proceeds on. And I make the observation. He does not look back to see if the others are following, because he's accustomed to being in command. He knows that his men will follow him without order.
brilliant character. Yeah, I looked into him as well because I'm very interested in British history, as some of you know. So I was quite fascinated by him as well. So thank you for introducing him to me. Let's also talk a bit about the short story, Miss Harkness' letzter Fall. In English, it's exchange principle, the exchange principle. So where did the idea come from? Why did you have the idea? And is in comparison to Sherlock Holmes, is this really going to be her last bow?
Well, I don't know about that. I had started a third novel with Margaret that involves the theft of the Irish crown jewels from Dublin Castle in 1910, and then my American publisher dropped the series after the second book, and so I stopped writing the book because my American agent said, "Well, no one else will pick up a discontinued series." But to go back to the short story, I have a talk I call Sherlock Holmes as science fiction. And the techniques the detective uses in his stories did not exist anywhere in the world. There was no database for like tobacco ash, as Holmes mentions, that sort of thing. And also in 1910, there was a British physician who was also a lawyer who was fascinated with Sherlock Holmes, and he, with the blessings of the police commissioner in Lyon, France, developed the world's first crime lab. He was given 2 years to see if it would help scientific analysis, if that could help solve crimes. And so he came up with what he called the exchange principle, and it says that no two solid objects can come into contact with each other without each leaving some trace upon the other. In other words, a criminal could not leave the crime scene without the crime scene leaving some trace on them and them leaving some trace of themselves behind. And I thought about that, and all of us have had meaningful interactions with other people that affected us profoundly. And I thought, that also happens to people. If you have a meaningful exchange with another person, both of you are changed by that experience. And so I have, the story is set, Margaret died basically in poverty at a convent-run hospital in Florence, Italy. And I have her telling a young novitiate about her experience with Dr. Locard, the French scientist, and how he cracked a case which helped to establish forensics as a valid branch of criminal investigation.
Both Miss Harkness und das Damengambit and also Miss Harkness' letzter Fall, they were both written from the point of view of Margaret Harkness, obviously, whereas the first novel was written from the point of view of Arthur Conan Doyle. So was it difficult for you writing from a female point of view?
It would have been if it had been the first book. But by the end of the first book, I had such a good feel for the character that I didn't really write it as a woman per se, but as a person that I know. And I'll also say that my wife is very similar to Margaret Harkness, and so she's my first editor. And if I write something that she thinks doesn't ring true, she's never slow to tell me.
Great, very good to have someone like that at home. Dorothee, du hast ja bereits das erste Buch Doktor Doyle, jagt the Ripper übersetzt und nun auch die Fortsetzung und auch die Kurzgeschichte. Wie war es diesmal für dich, das zu übersetzen, sowohl Miss Harkness und das Damengambit als auch Miss Harkness' letzter Fall? Gab es Herausforderungen? Wie war es für dich?
Also zunächst mal hat es wieder unglaublich viel Spaß gemacht. Dazu kommt, dass Miss Harkness und ich inzwischen gute Freundinnen sind. Wir kennen uns, ich kenne sie vor allen Dingen besonders gut. In Miss Harkness und das Damengambit kam mir zugute, dass ich wieder genau wusste, wo sie sich bewegte. Ich kenne mich in London gut genug aus, um alles nachvollziehen zu können, was sie gemacht hat. Insofern war ich eigentlich ständig mit ihr gemeinsam unterwegs und konnte mich sehr gut in sie hineinversetzen. Ein Unterschied zu Dr. Doyle, jagt the Ripper ist die Erzählweise, denn dort hat Bradley Harper sich der Erzählweise von Conan Doyle bedient und ich habe versucht, das dementsprechend auch ins Deutsche zu übersetzen. Diese Vorgabe gab es bei Miss Harkness jetzt nicht mehr, was der Sache aber auch ein bisschen Dynamik gegeben hat. Es hat sehr viel Spaß gemacht, das jetzt mal ja, stilistisch etwas anders zu übersetzen. Dasselbe gilt auch für Miss Harkness' letzter Fall. Auch wenn ich da nicht ortskundig war, konnte ich mich gut in die Situation hineinversetzen und es hat genauso viel Spaß gemacht, ihr auch in ihrem letzten Fall auf den Spuren zu bleiben. Ja. Ja, ich möchte mich bei dieser Gelegenheit ganz herzlich bei Arno Schröder bedanken, der mir mit einer Engelsgeduld das Luftgewehr erklärt hat. Viel mehr möchte ich jetzt an dieser Stelle gar nicht verraten. Ohne Arnos Hilfe wäre ich nicht in der Lage gewesen, die Technik zu verstehen und das entsprechend zu übersetzen. Danke, Arno.
Sehr schön, sehr schön. So, you didn't really answer the question yet. If it really was Margaret Harkness' final case, her letzter Fall. So let's just, maybe I'll ask another question and you can interpret it the way you like. So what are you working on right now? Are you working on any other projects at the moment? Perhaps something to do with a big ship? Or, or maybe what can we expect from you, especially maybe the German readers, in the future?
Well, I recently signed a contract for a novel that I was working on while I was doing my master's program in Scotland. It takes place aboard the Titanic. The American title is Maiden Voyage, and it has three meanings. Of course, it was the maiden voyage, the first voyage of the Titanic, also the last. There was a gang of female thieves called the 40 Elephants, who were so called because they operated out of a pub called the Elephant and Castle, and they operated out of there from 1780 to 1953. It's a dynasty almost of feminine crime. And then the third is there was a painting by the French artist Blondel of a young nude Circassian woman leaving a Roman bath. And so the 40 Elephants are on board the ship to steal this painting. And opposing them is a young man, a Pinkerton agent. His name was Harry Worth. He was a real person. His father was Adam Worth, and Adam Worth was a consulting criminal. He was the inspiration for the character of Professor Moriarty. Arthur Conan Doyle and William Pinkerton had been on a transatlantic crossing together, and as men of influence would do, they sat down at meals together, and Pinkerton mentioned this consulting criminal that Pinkerton respected very much because, unlike Moriarty, Adam Worth never used violence in his crimes. He had a certain code of honor that he would never harm anyone physically in the commission of his crimes. So that inspired the character of Moriarty. Late in life, Worth was captured at a bank robbery, and when he got out of prison was very poor. And he had a painting, he'd stolen a painting that the Pinkertons had been contracted to retrieve. He contacted William Pinkerton and said, "I'll let you have the painting for $25,000, a promise I will not be prosecuted for the theft, and a promise that when my son comes of age, you'll make him a Pinkerton agent because I don't want him to be a criminal like I was." Mm-hmm. And so I have the son of a master criminal against three of these very clever female thieves on board the Titanic. Each has their own plans, and of course, something else happens entirely.
Yes, we're looking forward to that. Probably we can read this one in Germany too soon. Quite confident that we can. So maybe I'll not ask again if there's anything in the future of Margaret coming from you.
Well, I've been encouraged to return to writing the third in the series about the theft of the Irish crown jewels, which my working title is Theft of Honor, because the honor referring, of course, to the jewels. It's an interesting real story. The caretaker for the jewels was a cousin of Arthur Conan Doyle, and Doyle in real life offered to help to recover the jewels. He was turned down, but of course in my story his offer is accepted, and I bring back him and Belle and Margaret one last time to track this down. I will say that the Irish Republican Army will be involved because this is the time of the early stages of the Irish struggle for independence, and so they will be involved as well. But an awful lot of fun is involved. I enjoy it. I enjoy Margaret very much. So the chance to bring them back one more time didn't take much to convince me.
Yeah, I can imagine. Um, Before we finish, I mean, we're back in London, and it's also got something to do with Margaret. We should mention why we're here, because obviously we're going to talk about the book, but also last year when we met, we were here for the film shoot of Leviathan, a short film based on, Dr. Doyle, Jack the Ripper, and now we are here, or we're here for the premiere, which was yesterday. Can you tell us a bit about the film project?
That was really a dream come true. About 4 years ago, the director, he read the book.
James Mansell.
Yeah, James Mansell. Yeah, he read the book, and just by coincidence, he is the great-great-grandson of Professor Bell. And he was so impressed with how about the book, but also how I represented his patriarch, that he knew I was trying to work on a film project. When I was doing my master's in Scotland, I did a script writing workshop. And so, long story short, after many trials and errors, we shot the film last July. In the middle of the film shoot was my birthday, which was a nice present. And so last night, I got to sit in a small theater in the heart of Jack the Ripper territory here in London with the cast and crew, and we saw the final take on Leviathan. And I'm not ashamed to say I shed a few tears at the end of just joy that I was able to realize this moment.
Very good. Yeah, it was a special moment for us as well, because we were there last summer. We have a strong connection to the book, and I think it's going to turn into something bigger. I'm quite convinced about that. Well, once again in German, Brad's Buch Miss Harkness und das Damengambit wird in Deutschland im April 2025 im Dryas Verlag erscheinen. Vielleicht an dieser Stelle auch herzlichen Dank und liebe Grüße an Sandra Thoms und Heike Görz vom Dryas Verlag. Vielen Dank euch für die gute Zusammenarbeit. Thank you very much, Brad. Thank you very much, Dorothee. My name is Philipp Röttgers of Opera Scriptorium. We are Brad's German agents. Behind the camera is my sister Kate, who's also part of our agency. Over there is Brad's lovely wife, Cherie. This is Dorothee Schröder. This is Bradley Harper. Any final words? Any last words?
No, just this collaboration with you and Dorothy and Kate has been just wonderful, and I'm very happy to know that I'm gaining a German audience, and they're getting to learn about the remarkable woman that Margaret Harkness was in real life, and I'm very proud to be her spokesperson, if you will, to the modern world.
Thank you very much. Any last words from you?
I can also admit that we are very happy to work with you together.
Thank you very much.